Okay, this is going to be a bit of a challenge. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. My name is Sharil. I shall be the person in the chair for the session this afternoon. I'm joined by colleagues from David Gosen, who's from Nielsen, James Heath from BBC, Dr. Lee from Korea Telecom, and Christopher Libertelli from Netflix. We don't have one speaker. Eric Scherer, unfortunately, was taken ill late yesterday evening, so he won't be here joining us today. So, if in the earlier session, Jean-Pierre said that the panelists were standing between you and lunch, we are now at a session where I guess the panelists here are standing between you and falling asleep. So we'll try to entertain you as best as we can. After all, we are in the field of communication. Some of us are in the field of content. And that's the topic that we have today. When I was asked to do this, I looked at the topic and I said, converged communications, are we there yet? I'm reminded by what my children always ask when we're on a long drive, and my youngest would always say, Dad, are we there yet? And sometimes I think the journey that a regulator takes or goes through is a bit like that. The question is, with driving, we know what the final destination is. Now, insofar as regulatory work is concerned, are we clear on what is the destination? Or do we have to look at different regulatory approaches, especially for what's happening today? We heard quite a few interesting interventions and discussions this morning. This afternoon, we'll be looking at content and applications in particular. So before I let the speakers speak, can I just get a sense around the room, how many of those in this room are purely telecoms regulators? Could I have a show of hands, please? Pure telecoms regulation. That means you don't look at content whatsoever. Right. How many are doing telecom regulation with a little bit of media or content regulation? Okay. What about the rest of you? You don't regulate at all. So, okay. So now I'm wondering what I'm doing here, but anyway. We've seen things shift, we've seen things change. We've heard the numbers this morning from the two keynote speakers. Everyone's talking about content, connectivity, devices, multiple platforms, multi-screen, 2-screen, 3-screen, 4 screens. How is this evolving? How is this changing our consumption patterns for content and applications? How is it changing the value chains? Is it blurring the boundaries? Do we, as regulators, have what it takes to take the industry to the next level, or should we stay out of it? So I'm not going to say very much more. I'd like to invite the first speaker, Mr. David Gosen, to help set the scene for our discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharil. Good afternoon. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to the IIC for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. It's a privilege to be here. And what I wanted to do was share with you a consumer view. How is what is happening today impacting the consumer? It was quite interesting, a lot of discussion this morning. And I think it took about an hour and 20 minutes for the consumer to raise his head at one point. And whilst clearly regulation and policy is critical, we have to put the consumer at the centre of what we do. Otherwise, we may have great regulation and policy, but no consumers buying our products and services. But before I start, to follow on from Shahil's post-lunch aerobics attempt with everybody, which left a lot of people undefined in terms of what they do. Can I just check how many people have a tablet of some sort? Not the medication, but the computer device. Okay, great, thank you. So that's most people. How many people use their tablet to watch some sort of TV or video? That's pretty much everyone. That may make my job a little bit easier because you're all there already. So If you are going to go to sleep, then I would just ask you to remember these four things, go to sleep, and then I'll wake you up at the end. We are experiencing what I call the new normal, and we will continue to see shifts in the media landscape. Randall this morning talked about 2020, 6 years. Yeah, I think no one knows what the world is going to be like in 6 years' time. I don't think we know what it's going to be like in 3 years' time. So this pace of change is unquestionable, and it's going to continue far faster than any of us are ready for. We also have the changing consumer enabled by technology. Again, in many instances, the consumer is ahead of brands, enabled by technology. And then we've got this whole world of fragmentation, which you can define in many ways, but to the consumer it's choice, it's complexity, it's control. To publishers, it is this fragmentation of channels that makes it very difficult for them to measure their businesses. So it's a fragmentation epidemic. And then we have video that is everywhere. And that's what I've called, my short session today, it's video everywhere, because as we heard this morning from a data perspective, video is going to be the key content piece that consumes most, if not all, of the data in the coming years. So if I just look at what I've called the dynamic media landscape, TV viewing is unquestionably growing. You hear the fact that TV is declining, it's growing in most markets. But it is now multi-screen and it is time shifted. So the way consumers are consuming TV is changing, but it is still growing. And you could argue we're about to enter a new golden age of TV and video. Streaming and OTT services are delivering that increased choice and control. And it's Netflix, it's Hulu, but it's also the streaming services provided by traditional broadcasters as well. We then have smartphones and tablets that are clearly transforming relationships and behaviour. And when I talk about relationships, it's the relationships they have with brands, with advertisers, but also with the publishers and the broadcasters themselves. And on the outside, or coming on the inside now, you have social media that really is creating the opportunity to empower consumers and create influencers and give them the chance to be outspoken in terms of their views, not only about content, but devices and packaging and policy and legislation, ultimately. And then in the world where advertising follows eyeballs, you've got the situation where cross-platform is becoming increasingly important to advertisers who need to understand what's happening to their audiences. Because as people are moving cross-screen, they're seeing what we call leakage from their classic measurement. So they need to be able to measure across screen. And we need to be careful not to talk about a single consumer, because behaviour is very different amongst age groups, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Big data, is becoming a much overused and I think probably a misunderstood phrase. Big data is dangerous, smart data is useful. And I think what we should be thinking about is how smart data helps us in business. But there are players out here in a single day, like YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, in terms of content that is coming from the world of social media. And again, the mobile devices, the tablets, are just going to continue to see a multiplication in terms of content at a scale that we just wouldn't have dreamt of before. And what we're seeing is this new usage, this new behaviour as an industry is driving us further and further away, potentially, from that consumer, because they are multitasking and being enabled to multitask in a way that they previously haven't been able. And that means if you're a brand trying to build a relationship, if you're a publisher trying to drive loyalty, then you have to think very carefully about how you don't get lost in an over-complex and over-complicated marketplace where the consumer has more choices than ever. As I said, and these are US numbers, TV still dominates. In the US, 156 hours of TV a month. Online, through PC, 7 hours, on mobile, 5. TV is king and will stay king. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about the fact that TV is dying and it's all going to go online and it's all going to go mobile. What we're seeing is the new devices, the new technology are providing complementary opportunities for people to consume video. And those that don't understand that are proclaiming the death of TV, which won't happen. And if we look around the world, and here we have, in terms of the way people are viewing video, and this is in Germany, 15% of German smartphone users watched video on their mobile device in the past 30 days. They're watching frequently. Again, if we're talking mobile, in China, over 17% of smartphone owners watch videos more than 3 times a day. So it's becoming almost a habitual form of entertainment on their mobile. And 83% of US smartphone owners, smartphone video users, claim to watch more TV, not less. So the assumption, again, that because people watch on multiple screens means they watch less traditional TV also is something that can be challenged. The other trend that we've heard about today, and again this is US data, just looking January 12 to January 13, the red bar at the top is OTT services. It's growing, it's doubled off a very low base. Will it continue to grow? Yes, it will. But look at live TV in the blue bar. It's still significant. And that's where the complementary part of the change in the media landscape is so important. And what's driving that is device proliferation. US data here, smartphone, 51% penetration, games consoles, which are becoming increasingly important in terms of consumption of TV and video. Tablet up 14%, IPTV 25%. And these are trends that we see around the world in most developed countries and many of the emerging countries. But critically, what we have to do is when we think about the consumer, we have to think, is every consumer behaving the same way? And what I want to look at is some of the demographics around 18 to 24-year-old. I have 2 daughters aged 21 and 19. I know you're thinking I don't look old enough, but they are. I can assure you, they are there, and they are my 2 personal lab rats, if you like. And what is fascinating is what I see, the way they behave is the same results I see from data from the US or from Germany or France or Italy or any country. And this first one is talking about 18 to 24s watching less TV in the US. Okay, that they do exactly the same thing. And 18 to 24-year-olds are also shifting viewing from TV to online and to mobile, and they do exactly the same thing. And in fact, what they do is, and if any of you have children of similar ages, they sit in the living room watching TV. They have a PC, they have a tablet, they have a mobile phone, they're watching TV, they're texting their friends, they're on Facebook, they're posting stuff on Instagram. They are the ultimate multitaskers. But what is interesting is they're changing the behavior in our household. So now they're affecting the way that I watch TV. So we have Netflix, and my daughter watches Netflix, and I now watch Netflix. And what's interesting is we did some research in the US, and it showed that Netflix streamers, around 45% of Netflix streamers go first to Netflix when they want to choose TV to watch. So they don't go to the EPG, they don't go traditional, they go straight to Netflix. So there's a real significant implication here of the way that the younger generation are viewing, how it changes traditional viewing and how it impacts old people like myself. What we've also found is that when people buy tablets, again, US data here, it does change the way they view TV sometimes. And here you can see the 18 to 24-year-olds claim to use traditional TV less frequently than they did before. So a bit of a substitution. And again, if I look at my lab rats, I see that every day of the week. Whereas the 25 to 54-year-olds, a little bit less, but not as much in terms of substitution. So we need to understand the behavior, not only in terms of the media landscape, but also the way that different segments of consumers are behaving. And the other thing we find, back to my first question that I asked you, is that today the viewers are very distracted. And around about 80% of tablet owners a month use their device when they're sitting in front of the TV to do something else. And you can see here, choose whichever number you like, bottom left-hand corner, 20% of tablet owners looked up a product for information on an advert they've seen on TV whilst they're watching TV with their tablet in front of them. But people are shopping, they're being social, and they're looking up for coupons and other things. They're distracted. And if you're a broadcaster, if you're an advertiser, what does that mean? It means actually consumers may not be consuming your advertising. So what we may well see is the growth, or what we will see, is the growth of complementary applications, that when you're watching TV, it will link and sync with your tablet or your smartphone, and it will start to serve advertising or added value content through both devices. Finally, one of the things that is quite interesting, and again, this is based on a panel we have here in the UK. It's an opt-in, permission-based Android panel that allows us to have a meter on users' phones. And the orange bar here is Wi-Fi, and the blue bar is network. And you can see the impact that Wi-Fi has on consumption. And the fact that if you're running a network, you'll see the bottom part, the blue bar, but you won't see the orange bar. And what we're seeing is, therefore, that the technology is not only in device, it's in network and it's in Wi-Fi that's changing consumer behaviour. And you can see the peak usage here is between 11 and midnight. And what's happening is that's the time that people are consuming videos and going on Facebook and social networks. So it's changing the landscape. The availability of Wi-Fi is changing that behaviour and enabling the consumer to do something very, very different. So, as I said, the new normal, changing consumer, and those are the two big things that I'd ask you to remember, and video everywhere is absolutely going to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Interesting. My powers of recollection, not what it used to be. I only remember 2 points out of the 4. Anyway, if I could ask that you indulge us and allow the other speakers to follow through, as we did in the earlier session, so that we can then have a discussion at the end. Can I now invite James to share with us some of the experiences that BBC has recently undergone. I'm just wondering, James, are you in the 18 to 24 or the 25 to 54?
Flattery will get you everywhere, Chair. Okay. Thanks for inviting me to speak, and thanks, Chair, again. Yesterday, some of you may have read in the papers or seen on the TV that BBC's Director General, Tony Hall, announced the conclusions of our strategy review, setting out the BBC's future until its centenary year in 2022, and some of the initial ideas and service ideas around how we'll try and get to that future. I'd like to share with you some of those thoughts today. Early on in that piece of work, we came to 2 conclusions. One was around sort of public policy, and one was perhaps more around strategy. In terms of public policy, our view, as you'd expect it to be, is that the sort of policy rationale for the BBC in particular, and indeed public service broadcasting in general, will remain as strong in the future as it's remained in the past. The sort of purpose of the BBC, what it's here to do, is timeless in terms of inform, educate and entertain with great programmes, be the risk capital of creativity in the UK and be its voice around the world, provide something of sort of value to everybody, not just commercially attractive audiences, and debate and reflect what's going on in the UK. That purpose is timeless. However, the way we deliver that purpose, the sort of services we do, how we do them, will need to be reinvented if we continue to stay relevant to the people who fund and own us, the licence fee payers. The second conclusion we came to sort of early on was that given the pace of change in the sector, both in markets and also, as David is describing, with audiences, that it would be foolish to try and set out a grand 10-year strategic vision with all the details filled in. Much better to set out some clear goals that will act as a guide for the strategy that we can then test, refine and adapt as the market and audiences change. And it's interesting that a word you hear a lot in the media sector is disruption, often from incumbent traditional players. Whereas audiences view what's going on, greater choice, greater control, greater convenience is a wonderful thing. And at the BBC, we see the future in quite an optimistic way. Every time new technology comes along, whether it's TV or digital or online, we've managed so far to adapt and deliver great content in new and exciting ways. And we hope we can pull that trick off again. So I suppose 3 further things that I'd like to just touch on, related to what David was talking about what do we see as some of the key drivers in the sector. Also, how does the BBC set itself up to succeed in the market where, to use a cliche, content will still be king, but actually discovery will be the new queen. And finally, what this means for policymakers and some public policy questions. One of the old adages about change is it doesn't happen at the same time and the same pace everywhere. Media convergence is a sort of case in point here. It's disrupted the music and newspaper industries at a far greater pace than it has television so far. I mean, our experience of convergence is one of complementarity between live and on-demand rather than one of substitution so far. I suppose this difference between sectors is partly a function of bandwidth requirements. It's probably partly a function of the different value chains, distribution chains of TV, music and newspapers. But I'd also argue it's got something to do with audience behaviour and human need. I mean, TV channels are in a way social media in the true sense of the term. They're relaxed, open ways of enjoying yourself with your family, where somebody has decided and put together a series of things that he thinks or she thinks will be a good idea for you to watch. And that meets a human need. The other human need is perhaps a more engaged one, around where people want to find something for themselves, to search out something special, to be in control. And our strategy is based on a fairly simple assumption that TV will remain hybrid for the foreseeable future. It will be about meeting both those human needs. TV channels will be here for a long time to come. They may start to look different, become more interactive. Yes, you'll see lots more people consuming lots more content on demand. You'll see greater demands for personalisation. And you'll see that the breakdown of the division between producer and consumer, as we're seeing in places like YouTube. A couple of examples of this, the change that's already happening. I mean, this year, the BBC streamed all the stages from Glastonbury, the UK's big pop music festival, for the first time. And the consumption, the number of people consuming on TV and radio, was greater than the sum total of people who had attended Glastonbury at the event in the last 40 years. I mean, I find this truly staggering. Every 10 days, more video is uploaded to YouTube than the BBC's TV output across its entire history. I think it's about 100 hours of video per minute is uploaded. That's staggering. So that's perhaps on the demand side. On the supply side, we think that TV will remain the focus of the living room for the foreseeable future, as I've said. But for many, it will be increasingly controlled and complemented by tablets and other devices. I think what you're going to see is that UK broadcasters, platform operators, infrastructure providers, big global device manufacturers, internet companies are all going to compete fiercely for that screen time and for the customer relationship and for the data. In terms of the sort of over-the-top services, we see those as much as partners as we do as competitors. They add more choice to the market, but they're also a new distribution platform for broadcasters to get their content out there. So we see them much as partners as competitors. So how can the BBC succeed, how can public service broadcasting succeed in this world? I think we've got to do, as Tony Hall set out, sort of 4 things very well. We've got to continue creating great content and intellectual property. We've got to secure a prominent position for our linear channels and our on-demand products on distribution platforms. I mean, the strength of the iPlayer brand will help us, but clearly the incentives may not necessarily be aligned between platform operators and broadcasters, so there may be a regulatory dimension there. The third thing we'll need to do is develop an outstanding capability in discoverability. The art and science of personalising, curating content and giving it to people as individuals, sort of one-to-one as well as one-to-many. And if we can get that right, then the amount of time that people spend with the BBC, the yield they get from that time should go up. We need to keep the time relatively constant, but the value they're extracting from that time by giving them both live and on demand needs to increase. And finally, we need to, forge a stronger, deeper relationship with the people who own the BBC licence fee payers. There's been a fairly paternalistic sort of Reithian, our founder, John Reith, sort of we'll educate, inform and entertain you. Actually, people can start informing and educating each other, and the BBC wants to be at the forefront of that movement. So, what does this mean for public policy, given that's my sort of day job rather than strategy? I'd say that this audience-led innovation by public service broadcasting probably needs to be supported by an appropriate regulatory structure. I mean, what we've had in the UK is, if you like, a virtuous circle between high levels of investment in original UK content, the widespread availability of public service broadcasters on platforms, and the discoverability and findability of their content. That's a virtuous circle which has led to, I think, around 90% of the investment in the UK content coming from the BBC and the commercial public service broadcasters. I suppose the question for policymakers is, if you still value the ends, you need to look at the means and the extent to which the regulatory framework, although it doesn't need overhauling, probably needs some targeted changes around prominence and around some of the carriage arrangements on platforms. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Yes, it's interesting to see how the BBC is transforming itself as well in this current day and age. We've heard from David Gosen from the media online standpoint. We've heard from James, BBC's perspective, what it's doing to transform itself. Now I'd like to invite you to come closer to my part of the world, where I'd like to invite Dr. Young-Lyoul to share with us some of the things that they're doing in Korea Telecom vis-a-vis this area of content and applications. Dr. Lee, you can either speak from here or there. I'll go there. Okay.
Dear colleagues, it's great to see you this afternoon. My name is Young-Lyoul, and I'm in charge of project development in KT in Korea. A few minutes ago, my leg was pressed by the chair of no. Yeah, it's a great honor for me to present KT's case at this IIC conference. Today, I want to talk about overall IPTV business in KT shortly, and then I will describe how and why KT has developed web-enabled IPTV, probably for the first time in the world. Let me give you a brief introduction about KT. As a leading telco, KT provided enhanced 4G service in 2012, and last month, KT launched a wide bandwidth LTE service in Korea. The user of KT's broadband LTE Advanced has a connectivity of up to 150 megabits per second. So we are very proud of it. Korean pay TV market is still dominated by cable TV SOs. However, IPTV is growing very rapidly. As you see on the slide, the number of IPTV subscribers is doubling every 2 years. Among three IPTV operators, KT is a leader with 59% of market share. Okay. In this slide, you can see what makes KT's IPTV service competitive among IPTV operators. KT launched web-enabled IPTV service in July this year. And we have a satellite hybrid IPTV service, which combines satellite broadcasting and IP VODs. And we offer as many as 170 channels and 130,000 VOD titles. to my knowledge, the number of VOD titles is the greatest in the world, because our IPTV service started as a VOD service. Now, I want to focus on our web-enabled IPTV service. This slide shows why KT made a strategic decision to develop web-enabled set-top box. There were two major contributing facts. Firstly, there were some limitations of previous ACAP middleware of set-top box. As you know, ACAP is the acronym of Advanced Common Application Platform. It is a standard for data broadcasting for terrestrial broadcasters. ACAP was chosen due to government regulation when IPTV was launched 4 years ago in Korea. With ACAP middleware, we have difficulties in supporting open web content and multi-device service expansion. So last year, we solved the regulation issue, and we get to develop web middleware. And we pursued potential strengths of web middleware. It enables content compatibility across multiple platforms. So we developed web-enabled IPTV service. Firstly, we developed a web middleware. And by adopting a web middleware, we achieved two major goals. Firstly, we provide a broadcasting service, including regular channels, VOD, and interactive services with our web-enabled middleware. And our IPTV allows open content access and content compatibility across platforms. There are four major benefits of web-based IPTV. A mashup service of broadcasting and web content easily accessed via TV, and extensive mobile link services made possible. You can transfer content seamlessly between your smartphone and your IPTV. And reduction of development of cost and time achieved. With HTML5 system, any single app can apply in any device or OS. So operators can reduce development cost and time dramatically. Here is an example of how our web-enabled IPTV can enhance viewers' experience. The users can access all the statistics and data on IPTV while watching at home. In Korea, baseball is hugely popular, as soccer is popular in England. And users can see players' records, profiles, when a player steps up to bat. And users can see the scores in ongoing other games in other stadiums. So this service is is very attractive in our IPTV users. Yeah, as you can see, KT has come a long way in recent years in IPTV business. However, we believe our journey is just a beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Interesting. Coming from Malaysia, I always tend to look at what the Koreans are up to because it's always interesting to see what else they're pushing out, from the IPTV to connected TV to smart TVs. Gives me regulatory headaches most times, Dr. Lee, but that's part of the challenge being a regulator. Now, last but not least, Mr. Content, Christopher Libertelli from Netflix. We'll come back to North America plus the world and see what Netflix is trying to do in that space. I think before you start, Chris, I just wanted to share with the audience that I just come from Cannes yesterday, where I was at the MIPCOM. We had several sessions, but it's interesting to see what we're talking about here and what they're talking about there in Cannes. Plus, weather's a lot nicer as well. Anyway, over to you, Chris, and then we'll talk about that during the discussion session.
Great. Thanks very much to the organizers. I appreciate being able to address this group. And I am particularly humbled to be standing at the very same podium that Dr. Stephen Collins just made his remarks from. I feel a bit like Hugo Chavez at the UN. Except he's an angel, not a devil. And for those who don't know, we worked together at Skype, which is where I was at before I joined Netflix about 2 years ago. And what I wanted to do today in the brief time that we have is to really say a word or two about Netflix, because as I travel the globe, I encounter a fair amount of misunderstanding about what we are and what we aren't. So I'm going to do that for a few minutes, and then I'll leave question time for the policy ramifications of what I'm about to talk about. So a few pretty pictures. It is early days for Netflix here in Europe. We are currently in the Nordics, the UK and Ireland, and just launched in the Netherlands about 3 weeks ago. Roughly speaking, that's about 39 million broadband households. The point of this chart is just to demonstrate how much more there is to go in Europe, with the major markets like France and Germany totaling about 63 million broadband households. The flags are just illustrative. There are, of course, other countries that would add to that list, but it's a large addressable market. And of course, our market is defined by the number of broadband households because we deliver all of our movies and television via the internet. And this is an example of the kind of content that we offer. I broke it into 3 categories because I think it generally describes the kind of content you would discover on Netflix in any of the markets that we're currently offering service. On the left side are just a set of movies. We sometimes refer to these as evergreen titles, titles that endure, titles that people want to watch even though they're a few months or years old. Probably the best example of that would be a title like The Godfather. In the middle is 4 examples of something that we're very excited about at Netflix, and this is the 4 original productions that we've launched in all of our markets. Orange is the New Black, House of Cards. We resuscitated Arrested Development, which was a Fox production, and a hilarious one at that. That was recently came out a few months ago. And Hemlock Grove, also a horror flick, that serialized television show that we've resuscitated. And if you haven't had the opportunity, I would highly encourage folks to check out Orange is the New Black. It is a wonderful, touching story a true story about an upper middle class woman who finds herself in a minimum security prison upstate New York. Mayhem ensues. And I want to say I appreciate the comments from Tata this morning about House of Cards. Folks in this room will know that House of Cards is a derivative work. House of Cards was, I think, a BBC production. So we updated it and brought it to America, and it's set in DC and done very well for us. The other title that's done particularly well for us in this market is Breaking Bad. You probably have your own perceptions of what kind of content is available on Netflix. It does change based on which geographic market you're in. We did a very innovative deal with the licensors of Breaking Bad to allow us to show Breaking Bad to folks in the UK a day after it aired in America. and that's been performing very well for us. You may know this guy. Folks know this guy? Well, it turns out that he is a Breaking Bad fan, and now I'm American, I don't speak the Queen's English, but he did say this about Breaking Bad. He said it was rather addictive and strangely alluring, which I think in American speak, as he was trying to say, was awesome. I think. I'm not sure. So I want to say a few words just about the service, and we'll leave Mr. Cameron up here. If you guys don't like that, we can just go to the end. We're not a generic video company. Much has been talked about with regard to user-generated content. We don't do user-generated content. We don't do news. We don't do sports. We don't do pornography. We don't do music videos, and we don't do any reality-based television. We are a movie and a television series network. And we like to think of ourselves as counterpositioned against the cost and complexity of most customer relationships with MVPDs. And as been said much this morning, there's a great deal of change happening in the telecoms and content markets. And for most existing networks, for most existing MVPDs, the economic transition will occur through something called TV Anywhere. And if a customer continues to subscribe to linear TV through a multi-channel video program distributor, they'll get a password to use an internet app and the networks that they currently subscribe to on linear. But that the more networks successfully keep their primetime programming behind this authentication wall, our view is that the less cord cutting will occur. And so the same consumer who finds today it worthwhile to pay for a linear TV package may find that in the future, she will subscribe to a linear plus application package. And existing linear networks that offer compelling apps will get more viewing over time, and they will become more valuable to the subscriber. And those that fail to get more viewing and develop these first-class those that fail to develop first-class applications will see their viewing and revenue drop. And in addition to the specific linear apps that are being built by some large MVPDs, and here I'm talking about Xfinity in the United States or SkyGo here, Horizon, individual network apps. And what we're seeing is that there's a great deal of customer affinity to the program, right? So when people talk about what they like on TV, they say Breaking Bad or The Sopranos. They don't typically say Showtime or AMC, although there's some blurring of that line, particularly with Breaking Bad. So individual networks like HBO Go, will develop their own applications, and I think it's fair to say that those application development cycles are a bit ahead of the MVPDs, and that's where, when we look at the market, a larger and larger share of viewing is coming from. Here's a fact for you to think about as we talk about policy. It is hard to think about how big this market could become because of the number of hours of television that people are watching. In 2017, the firm HIS estimates that the market for internet-enabled devices that show video will hit 8.2 billion by 2017. That's a 90% increase in the 4.3 billion expected to hit by the end of this year. And if you do the math, that's about 1.1 internet-connected devices for every person on the planet. So more than one interconnected device for every person on the planet. That's a staggering number. And the way we look at the market, we see two kinds of competitors, broadly speaking. We call competitors for entertainment time, such as video game providers, sports networks, and piracy, competitors for time. We call a narrower set of firms that bid against us for content in Hollywood and other places as competitors for content. HBO is a good example of that. As I mentioned earlier, HBO Go is untethered from MVPD subscriptions in some parts of Europe, but by and large remains something you can only access if you're also buying a full package of programming from the underlying MVPD. And it's often been said, it's certainly said inside Netflix, that HBO is our chief competitor and that we're hoping to become HBO before HBO can become Netflix. They certainly bid against us for many originals projects in Hollywood, and they do not currently bid for what we call rolling five or prior season television. So while we compete, there's a complementarity there in terms of how much viewing is happening, And I would reference the slides that were mentioned earlier. There also seems to be a complementarity between us and MVPD providers. We just did a deal with Virgin here in this market, and we think that's going to drive additional incremental usage. So I want to end with just a final statement of regulatory humility. I've spent a time as a regulator at the FCC, and I think one of the enduring lessons of that experience was to not try to predict the future. So if we could look into the future at ways that people access entertainment in the future, we would no doubt see a very different image than the one we see today. We will see stunning video quality, a proliferation of screens, and yet unimagined natural user interfaces, and an unbelievable range of choice. But if we turn instead and look at the person watching that screen, we'd observe a number of similarities across generations. We'd see someone who is taking a moment to escape into a story, to relax and enjoy one of life's pleasures with their friends and family. The future of Netflix is really about the future of television, and the future of television is about the future of storytelling. And we hope to be an important part of that, and particularly in the area of serialized dramas, which folks seem to enjoy so much on Netflix. So why don't I leave it there, and then we can get into questions about the policy implications of all that. Thank you.
Thank you.